The Juneau World Affairs Council presents Tuurou, Hawaiki, Returning to the Origins with Tipene Pickett. An alcohol and drug counselor from Auckland, New Zealand, Pickett provides training and healing for Maori and other Pacific Islander peoples through the practice of motivational interviewing. It is a tool he has explored and developed over decades to influence the healing journey of Maori reclaiming their mana, inherent influence, and Tapu, absolute worth. Pickett's presentation will cover the use of a puuraakau, traditional narrative of origin, to frame his personal journey of remembering his identity and revitalizing his language, and, in doing so, demonstrate the value of Indigenous knowledge in partnership with Western knowledge to help people talk themselves into change.
Au kuitara kue te karehi wara te tohu o ngā tua o maratuhu o ngā whetue ka napa ki rangi te rangi te honei. Te pōraro roto o mā tiha te hui rapo o pare tu ua. Ko hauuri o ka hanguna te tauraro tako wakataki timu. Oi, te maratihi o para tēnei mea wai nuku, wairangi ki te whaiao, ki te ao mārama, ki te whaiao, ki te ao tūroa, haumi e, hui e, tā ake e. Ki tō tātou kaihanga kui rā te tīmatanga me te whakamutunga o ngā mea katoa. Ko rangi nui ki runga kua papa tūnaku e tākoto tēnā kōrua ki ngā matu o te ao. Tēnei wā ka huri o mihi ki ngā mate i riro atu ki te pō kere te pō te kite, te pō tāhuri atu ki te pō namu no ana, ki ngā ringa o heni nui te pō no reira ki a rātou moi mai rā. Ka huri o mihi ki te kanohi ora e hui mai nei. Ki o koutou maunga e tūteiti ana o koutou awa e riri nei haere tino te mihi mai o hā ki o koutou. I tēnei wā ki te mana whenua o tēnei rohe ki ngā tangata o te iwi o te Tlingit, toi tū te marae o Tangaroa, toi tū te marae o Kapuitarangi, toi tū ngā uri o ngā Kinglet I kaitiaki mō tēnei whenua no reira ki a rātou tēnei te mihi. Ai tēnei wā aha ko he poto he mihi ngākau ki o koutou no reira tēnā koutou. Kia ora mai tātou katoa. That's hello in Maori, folks. The first was what I call a tauparapara, and it talks about the navigational waka canoe that I descend from. And it talks about it going to a place called Tiha, which is Lake Titicaca, and bringing back the kumara across the Pacific, and then eventually ending in Aotearoa. And they call it the land of the long white cloud, but in the traditions of my ancestors, roa, Aotea was a type of cloud. Roa not only meant long, but it meant distant. And where our kōrero says it was the land of the distant cloud, where new particular sorts of clouds appeared over land, and once we saw it, we knew we were close to land. So Aotearoa, land of the long white cloud. Personally, I think it should be the land of the distant cloud, but I'm biased in that. And next was just an acknowledgement to the Creator, to the Sky Father and the Earth Mother, to those that have passed and the tupuna, your ancestors that stand behind you, and just an acknowledgement to them. And also to the mana whenua, the people of this land. We call them the ahikaroa, those who keep the home fires burning. So to the Tlingit people here, the words I used was, may the elemental energies of the sea endure, may the clouds in the sky endure, and may their descendants endure also. And to you, the living that are here today and the ancestors that stand behind you, it's a real privilege to stand in front of you. And what I'd like to do is tell you a little story. We have a concept in Māori called Tapu and noa. And they're sort of representations of a journey. That word tapu sort of got colonized to mean the word sacred. It got reduced to mean that word. And I'd like to sort of maybe give you a different perspective from what my ancestors understood that word to mean. At the end of the spectrum, there's a word called noa. And I'll come to that in the story. These two are sort of states of being. And so my job as a counsellor is to help people move from a state of tapu to a state of noa. And when I asked one of my elders how he saw the tikanga, the ways of being that we have as Maori, and also the way of being that motivational interviewing was in these two different worldviews and how they related to each other, his words were really profound for me. And he said, well, tikanga has its own whakapapa, I'm sure it has its, and its own mana. And what he was saying is our ways of being have their own ancestry and they have their own inherent influence. And he said, I'm sure motivational interviewing has its own whakapapa, has its own mana, has its own genealogy, has its own inherent influence, and just allow each to sit in their own inherent influence without trying to overlay one over the other. So his words sort of guided my practice, just to give acknowledgement to the power of Indigenous bodies of knowledge, particularly those of my ancestors and the stories we had, which encoded many different layers of meaning, of understanding, and coded into stories because they were the best way that as an oral tradition we could pass information from generation to generation and keep the integrity of that knowledge intact. So I'm going to tell you a little story about, which is one of many of these puuraakau that we have. And we're people who were an oral tradition. We also carved our language into the trees. Rākau is our name for tree. Pū is a name, it can mean sound, and it can also mean the origin. So a definition of puuraakau is the sound of the story of the tree, of which we would carve our narratives of origin into. And each tree has a specific sound, so we knew what type of tree we were carving by the sound that it made. So I'm going to tell you a little story. And this story goes right back in our sort of cosmology to the beginnings of the beginning, before there were sort of the physical environment was around. And it goes back to the Sky Father and the Earth Mother. Ranginui was the Sky Father, Papa Tuanuku was the Earth Mother. And these two had made a commitment to be together forevermore. And a very, very strong and a very loving bond these two energies had for each other. So within the space between them, children started to be born, and over many, many eons in a long period of time. And the number of children varies from sub-tribe to sub-tribe. The story that I have, there were 70 children born into this space. And as more children were born into this space, the more cramped it started to get. Until one day, a little character by the name of Kekeriwai, and kere means to stir in our language, just went, I'm over this, I've had enough. I'm sick of being so squashed and confined in this space. Something needs to change. So for the very first time in the space between Ranginui and Papa Tuanuku was a vibration that said something needed to move. And of course, Kekeriwai was thinking, well, maybe I need to just check my own perception on this, and turns to one of the siblings close by the name of Tuurou waho. Tuurou is to stretch and waho is out. And asked Tuurou waho, look, is it just me or is it really cramped in this space? And Tuurou waho says, yeah, look, man, I'm with you. I think it's really cramped in here. I think we need to stretch out a little bit. And Tuurou waho was one of these energies that also was great at networking, so started to spread the word that maybe something needed to change and the space change. And this was picked up by another, and these were all the middle siblings of the 70. These were all the sort of middle kids. And it was picked up by a little character by the name of Uipoto. And Uipoto hears this, pops their head up, and as Uipoto pop their head up, they see this little light way, way over in the distance. And because it's the only point of difference in all darkness, got really enamored with what is this light? And so asks one of their siblings next to them by the name of Mamaru and says, can you see that little light over there? Do you know what that is? And Mamaru he said, I think that's called a hinatori. And a hinatori is a light that sort of pulses. And so these two think it just looked more inviting where this little point of light was to where the dark and the cold and the sort of cramped confinement that they were in. So they decide they're going to take a little journey to this light. And as they're doing so, one of their siblings close to them by the name of Tuurou pops his head up and says, I think that's the light of the glowworm, the light of the moko huruhuru. And so these three decide they're going to take a little journey to this little light here. And as these three were making their way there, one of the oldest siblings in whakapapa sort of means genealogy, was the fourth oldest sibling, and their name was Whiro. And Whiro wasn't so happy about all of his younger siblings sort of disturbing the status quo and disturbing the peace. So he says to Uipoto, if you take another step, I will curse you. And Uipoto is so focused and enamoured on this little hinatori, pays no attention whatsoever to Whiro's threats of a curse. So Whiro curses Uipoto, and Uipoto gets goosebumps. And we get goosebumps sometimes when, not only when we're changing temperature, but also when the invisible energies are around and the hairs stand on the back of your neck. And for our people, it was a sign that things were afoot in the invisible celestial realms and that they were present around. However, Uipoto pays no attention to that and continues on their journey towards this hinatori. So Whiro reaches out to grab hold of Mamaru, and all he can get hold of is his top knot. And he grabs that, pulls it back and pulls all Mamaru's hair out. And Mamaru yelps. And however, despite the pain, he had made this commitment to both Uipoto and Tuurou to journey over to satisfy their curiosity about this hinatori. So this is winding, this is annoying and agitating their older brother no end. And so he sets his sights on Tuurou, takes out a club, takes a swing at him, and Peki means to jump, and Tua means beyond. Tuurou jumps, transforms himself into a centipede, and sort of sticks it to his brother and sort of goes, ha ha, you can't get me. And so of course Whiro is now getting really, really agitated and thinks, well, if I don't have any control over these three, it's this little hinatori. I need to find some way to extinguish this light. This seems to be causing all of my problems right here. So he's musing away about how he can extinguish this light when the third youngest of all the siblings, sort of the hero of the story, hero of a lot of our stories, and this character's name was Tane. So Tane was the third youngest of all the siblings. And Tane was just watching this happen. He was just observing all of this happening. Not getting caught up in it, just sort of watching what was unfolding. And because he wasn't so sort of emotionally and caught up in all of this, he has this bright idea and goes to his older sibling, Whiro, and says, look, man, I think there's only one way you can extinguish this little light, and that is to flood this place with light. And so this is the story of what they call a whakapapa, of a genealogy of these words, Tapu to Noa. Tapu is any state of confinement and constriction. Noa, when you split the word up, is N-O, no, and A. No means from or to belong to, and A is an old word for light. Freedom from restriction, freedom from darkness will come from the light. And so this is a different way of seeing those words, tapu and noa, where what got reduced to just one word of sacred, for us was a whole journey about a change of states, from a state of any state of constriction to a state free of that constriction. And so these puuraakau, these stories, were maps of consciousness. So these were all aspects of who we are. And so within our puuraakau were maps of how to be. And I'll just give a brief example. There's nothing like curiosity and focus to mitigate the voice of fear. There's nothing, which was uipoto, and we each have an uipoto within us. We each have a mamaru that, despite the pain, commitment to a reason and to others around us is a great way of mitigating fear. So within our stories were contained many teachings about what energies to access in order to move emotional states, for example. So these were maps of consciousness, rather than just be considered myths and legends. So they were our way of encoding this information. And this is one part of a much larger narrative that would eventually become the separation of the sky, the rangi nui and Papatuanuku, and the light would flood in. So it was about a change of state. However, Tāne offered the winning argument that would begin this process that would eventually end in the separation of the parents. So the idea is the journey from a state of constriction to a state of freedom, state of unknown to a state of known, a state of unsafe to a state of safe. And so we utilize this knowledge in our process of engagement. And I'm just going to hit the home button for a sec, because now I'm going to sort of apply this to our process of engagement. We call it the pōwhiri. And, that was what I forgot. This is what's the word? I forgot to translate what I said earlier. So the waves of Te Huki is the mountain that I affiliate with. The fruitful waters, Waihua, is the river that I affiliate to. Kurahikakawa is my sub-tribe. Kahangunu is my tribe. And Waihua is the marae, or sort of like the complex, the community complex I belong to. And a woman by the name of Merikote was my ancestor that connects me to who I am as Maori. And I never knew anything about this till 25 years ago, when my mother took a journey back to where she was from, and they all burst into tears that an arm of the whānau had returned home. And she took me down there, and when I stood next to the grave, call it an urupa, of this woman Merikote, and I looked out to the ocean, I felt very at home, because I would see this vista in my dreams. So there was a homecoming for me. Tuurou, Hawaiki itself means returning to the origins. Hawaiki being, some would say it might be Hawaii, but it was the islands that Māori sort of journeyed from to Aotearoa, and Tuurou was to return. So it's sort of a metaphor for returning back to who I am. And so my dad was from Germany. My mother was, as well as being Māori, was Scots-Irish, and Tipene Pickett is my name. I was actually born Stephen. Tipene is a Māori transliteration of that name. And it was given to me at a Māori language course from these older women, they call them kuia, who were attending the course, and they just called me Tipene. I liked it and it stuck. But eventually, if to claim my name, I will claim this name Waihua as being a name that I will eventually change my name to, as my journey has been a shift from growing up in a very Western world to immersing myself more into who I am as Māori, and giving acknowledgement to each part of who I am and the influence that that's had in my life. So that's and so when we ask people, instead of saying, who are you? We would say, no hekoe, where are you from? Or we might say, ko waikoe, from whose waters do you descend? Would be the two ways that we would ask people when we're introducing ourselves. We have a saying called nau te raudo, nāku te raudo, kōrai te iwi. From your basket, from my basket, the well-being of the people will continue. And so for this presentation, it's looking at the basket of the knowledge of Māori and the basket of the knowledge of the Western and the modalities and ways of being that I've grown up with, and knowing that there's value in both. However, today I'm going to focus particularly on the Māori process of engagement. So remembering that story is about a change of states from tapu to noa. what I'd like you to do for a sec is just to close your eyes, And I want you to imagine, and you may already have this and be in a setting that this was part of your experience. I want you to imagine that you lived in a time where you and all of those that you loved and were important to you lived in a very close proximity to you. And I want you to imagine maybe this was a longhouse, this was an ancestral house. And around this ancestral house there was palisades, which we called pātu wata wata. I want you to imagine what the sounds and the sights might have been. Maybe there was the smells of food cooking. Maybe there was the sound of the elders passing on knowledge of genealogy to the younger ones. Maybe there was nets being weaved, there were baskets being woven, there was the sounds and the smells of the earth with gardening. And all of these things that we did to look after, to be in tune with our environment as well as in tune with each other. And just imagine what that might feel like when you have everyone that you're related to and you love very close to you. And you can open your eyes whenever you want. And so this here is what a pā might have traditionally looked like. They call this a pā. This here is what they call a tupuna whare. This was an ancestral house, of which inside were carvings of the ancestors and a lot of traditional knowledge also carved into these walls. And so outside we had these rings, these palisades to protect what was most important to us, which was the next generation, what we would call our mokopuna. So I want you to imagine too that a cry goes up. Or actually I'll come back just a bit. The process that I'm going to describe is called a pōwhiri. Pō is the state, some would say the state of night. However, it's a state of potential organising itself. In our cosmogony we have te kore, the state of unorganised potential, te pō, the state where potential's organising, and it's in that state the story that I told earlier is existing in the state of te pō. And whiri is to weave. So there's a weaving of potential is the name that we give our process of engagement. And so pre-European, what would have happened is a cry would have gone up, and it might have gone, kia hiwara, kia hiwara, kia hiwara ki tēnei tuku, kia hiwara ki tērā tuku. And it's sort of saying someone is coming, be aware of this side, be aware of that side, be alert. And so they call that a whakaara-ara. And so now this whole village is in a state of tapu. Who are these people and what are their intentions? Are they people we know? Are they not? Are they friends? Are they foe? And so a process of assessment is beginning. And back in the prior to the changes in the processes, we would have sent our warriors down, out here, out these gates, all the way down as far we could, to meet them as far away from what was most important to us as possible. We want to give as much distance as we can because we want to protect what's most precious to us. So we would send our best warriors down. And these best warriors were to carry they called sort of a rākau, a take, and it was an invitation to get an idea of what their intentions were. So they would lay and it might be a branch, a symbol to indicate to these people coming where they stood with the home people. So if it was laid end to end, and you are the manuhiri and I am the home person, I'm saying, I know you, come in peace. If it was laid on a 45-degree angle, I'm not so sure about you. So just letting you know that we're wary and cautious. If it was laid like that, don't cross that line. However, that would have been put down on the ground. And so we were indicating to these people, this is where you stand with us. And if they chose to pick this up, it was a sign that they were willing and agreeing to a process of entering into a relationship. And that might not happen. The intentions could become, like ill intentions would become apparent very quickly. We would have looked also to see, is it women and children coming? Is it a group of young men coming? Do they have weapons? We were assessing, we were great observers, so we were assessing long before they got anywhere close to us what the makeup was and maybe what their intentions would be. So if they chose to pick this take up, they would be taken through single points of entry through those palisades. And we did that. They were very narrow, so we could control the flow of the traffic. So we were very intentional about how we designed our pa so that we could control the flow of traffic. And they would be taken up through, I'll go back again, they would be taken all the way up through these single points of entry. Eventually they'll come to around here. There's a little sort of another gate. And this gate has a special name. And it's called a waharoa. And rather than call it gate, in our Maori language, each of our, what you might call letters, didn't represent letters, they were sounds. A, e, I, o, u, ngā, nge, nge, ngo, ngu, and there was a whole lot more. So if you wanted to get to know the meaning of a word, you'd break down the individual sounds, and each sound has a genealogy and a particular meaning. So wa is our word for time and space, ha the breath, and roa long. If you got to this gate, it was time just to take a pause, take a deep breath, because you're about to enter into a battlefield, which was called the atia, which is the grassy period, the grassy patch on the other side of those gates. And this was a time of deciding whether you wanted to cross that gate and deciding who was going to represent you as the visitors, who was going to be the person who was going to give the karanga, who was going to speak on behalf. And it was a time of preparation. So when they, and from a therapeutic sense, this would represent the journey of people maybe coming up to the service. That what are some of the things maybe that they've done in preparation for, or what's happened, that's their story that's brought them to these gates, for example, and gives them time to think about where I am today in my process of change. So I'm relating this a little bit to the therapeutic journey. If they chose to walk through these gates, there were 3 elemental energies. The word atua means atua means that which is beyond, that which is in a vibrational form, not a physical form, but a vibrational form. We understood our world to be contained of many different vibrational energies that represent in different domains. Tū Mātauranga was often called the god of war, but from a Māori, that was more of a colonised way of seeing it. From a Māori way, this was the energy within us that moves us to instant action. So imagine that if somebody's threatening your children, you're not going to sit there and think, well, maybe I should do something. You're going to get into action very quickly. Tū Mātauranga is that aspect of ourselves, instant energy without thought. Another one was Tānei Te Wānanga, who was the elemental energy that not only has the ability to collect information, but in that story I just told you, had also the ability to observe. So it had a special relationship to knowledge, but also was that energy that we lean into to guide our words, to guide the knowledge that was going to come out of our mouths. And lastly, Tāwhiri Mātea, they saw as the god of the winds. This is our elemental energy of, that is the winds. And in our stories of origin, Tāwhiri Mātea has like the winds do, they have a great way of clearing the energy. Because when you got to that gate and you are walking into this marae ātea, this grassy piece outside this ancestral house, you wanted to make sure that everything that might create conflict was left outside that ancestral house. And this will become clear in a minute. So, tū tauenga also looked after any conflict that occurred. So if words were spoken that created conflict, then tū tauenga would be the energy sort of responsible for that. And tāne tuānanga would be the energy responsible for the words spoken. Tāwhiri Mātea is responsible for the energy to clear the space before you moved into this ancestral house. And there was a process that would occur. I'll come back to that one in a sec. A kāranga. So the old woman would kāranga. And kā's to ignite, ranga is to weave. And they were weaving the celestial realms and the terrestrial realms. We believe that your ancestors were those standing behind you, and they would be also with you in this process of engagement. So we wanted to acknowledge those who have passed, who are standing with you and behind you. So we're weaving on both sides of the home people and the visitors. Your ancestors are being woven together. You're also weaving the living together. It was an invitation. Kā to ignite. Ranga was to set in motion or to weave. So we're now starting to weave relationships and acknowledge each other through this kāranga. And we chose the old woman because they had a life where they carried life within them. They had given birth. They had lived through what we call the ruahine phase. They'd passed through that time of childbearing, and maybe they'd also had people who were there close die, and so they'd experienced a range and a depth of life that when they kāranga in their voice, they could project this in their wail, in this kāranga, they could project a vibration that moved people. Often the hairs on the back of your neck would stand on end, and certainly when I've been to Pōwhiri and these women start to kāranga, that's often the first thing that happens for me, is the hairs on the back stand, on the back of my neck stand, and I know now my ancestors are with me. I have got the invisible realms entered into this space. So this would be setting the process in motion, and this would be done on both the home side and the visitor side. Next we would start with karakia. Karakia is a command. So when Christianity came, the prayers of Christianity were requests. For our people, karakia is a command. Ka was to, once again, to ignite. Ra was short for tamanui te ra, which was the energy of the sun or the life essence. Ki is the vibration of fullness and satisfaction. And so we were intentionally accessing the energy, the life-giving energy of the sun to create a particular vibrational space that we wanted. So we had karakia that would help settle. We had karakia that offered protection. We had karakia that might change the weather. We had karakia that, because we knew that we could, through our genealogy and through these energies that existed within us, they were our direct connection to our environment also. And we knew through sound and intentionality we could shift the world of our environment as well. We could command that for a purpose, for an intentional purpose. So a karakia, when two people were meeting, was done to clear the space, clear any negative energy and offer protection often. Next was a process of acknowledgement. We call it a whakamihi. As I did just before, I'm going to acknowledge the Creator, I'm going to acknowledge the celestial parents, I'm going to acknowledge those who have passed on, I'm going to acknowledge you, the living. I'm going to acknowledge also the reason that we're here. And I'm going to acknowledge two things, your mana and your tapu. Your mana, a way of explaining that, if you can imagine a baby, when a baby's born, it's utterly dependent on its outside world for its survival, but it does one thing to organise its whole world in its most defenceless state to have all its needs met. It's a baby that just does it on its own, but it cries, it tangies. That cry will organise those who care for that baby to look after all its needs, and we'd say ko te mana o te pepe. However, if you cry like a baby at 21, you're going to get a different response. So mana was something that as you increased your agency, your relationship and responsibility to your inherent influence also changed. But the idea of mana is your inherent influence in the world. My mother used to say it a bit like, if the universe is a jigsaw and we each have our own unique piece, without that unique piece of yours, the universe isn't complete. It has influence in the grand scheme of the whole. And so the idea of mana is your uniqueness, and that uniqueness makes a difference. Tapu, I mentioned earlier, has often seen as a state of restriction and constraint. Also has another meaning if you split this word up. Tā means to inscribe. This is called a tā moko. And tā is to inscribe or imprint. Pu, as I mentioned earlier, can mean sound, but particularly in this context, it means the beginning of the beginning, the source, the origin of. So another word meaning for tapu is within our DNA, is inscribed the knowledge of the universe, is inscribed into your DNA. All knowledge of creation is inscribed into your DNA. So, which is why we would have certain rituals to ensure, like for example, the head was considered really tapu because of what it contains and because of the importance of this. So, because within that was, and within ourselves was this knowledge of creation. So when I'm acknowledging you, I'm acknowledging you're important, you make a difference, you have a uniqueness, and you have the knowledge of the universe contained within you. And so from a therapeutic sense, we're saying to those who come to our doors, you're important and you matter. This is before they've said anything. We're going to say to you, you matter. And we're going to give recognition to them as an individual, to their ancestry that they come from, and that they make a difference in this world. And so this mihi mihi is, we would give an acknowledgement, the home people would give an acknowledgement to the visitors, saying we give recognition to where you're from, that you have a genealogy, you have an identity that's important. And they too would then get up and they would also give their reply. They would give acknowledgement back. This was also sometimes an area where conflict would arise. And last year we had in what they call matatini, it's where we do kapahaka, our sort of entertainment, and it was our war dance, but it was also entertainment, and it's a huge competition in Gisborne, and it was, in New Zealand. And it was held in Auckland, called Tamaki Makaurau, where I'm from, and the tribe that's the home people there is called Ngāti Whātua. And so tribes from all around Aotearoa come to this event. And there was one tribe in particular that borders Ngāti Whātua called Tainui. And Ngāti Whātua had told the younger ones, it's time for you to speak. So they sat down as the elders and they allowed the younger ones who hold enormous amounts of information and held their own mana to stand and speak on behalf of the tribe. Tainui, the older folk in Tainui who were going to speak, were not happy that the younger ones were speaking, and they started to voice that. So why is it that you're having your young ones give us the acknowledgement, you know, where they're barely out of nappies, how can they possibly sort of give us acknowledgement? And they also started to say, and we believe we are the people that are the mana whenua. We are the people of this particular area. And so the young guy stands up and he says, tēnā koe tō teka, which basically means, thank you for your rubbish. That's just what you are saying is complete rubbish. And this was a young guy who's very versed in the knowledge of genealogies. So he would be somebody you could ask and give a name to, and he would be able to recite your genealogy and who you linked to. And he was a young man who spent a lot of work. And so he gave them an invitation. He said, despite the rubbish that you've just said, we don't actually need you here, but we'd like you to come and we'd like you to engage with us and be part of this big celebration. And we want you to come and have a meal with us, because having a meal together was the last part of the process of shifting from a state of unknown and known or unsafe to safe, was to share a meal. At that point, they got up and they left. And so that was often how we dealt with conflict. In that ritual space, there was no bloodshed, but by the fact that they got up and they left, they were signaling to them, we don't agree with what you said, and we're going to stand strong in our word, and we're going to go. So this occurred, it's pretty rare. I guess it was the first time in such an important kaupapa, reason for getting together, that you got to see how conflict would have been dealt with in the old way, which was on this domain called the marae ātea, which was a battleground. It was considered a battleground. It was appropriate for conflict to be brought up in this space. So they left, and the process carried on. And so the young ones then continued to offer their mihi, their acknowledgements to the rest that stayed. So this process of mihi sometimes brought up conflict, and that conflict would be addressed in that space. After this process of acknowledgement of mihi, and I talked about mana being inherent, we're giving acknowledgement to that inherent influence and to that knowledge that you hold within you. There would be a process called whakawhanaungatanga. That's my son, that's my grandson. Those are a bunch of other minties. These are people who are trainers of trainers in motivational interviewing for some years back, but I consider family. So this whole big word here, whakawhanaungatanga. So I'm going to sort of, as I said, you can break our word down, and it starts to give some idea as to what it means. The word whānau, this word whānau here, was often got reduced to the word family. However, the word whānau belongs to a larger word called whakawhanaungatanga. The word whaka means to create. Whānau, or actually, it's probably better that I just do this. So the word o is I or me, is the individual. No indicates belonging. Whānau, whā is the word for four, so it could indicate generations, 4 generations. Ngā is your extended relations, your sort of cousins. Whaka was to create connections of belonging between those that were your blood relations. And tanga was sort of a process of completion, the establishment of a sense of connection and belonging based on who you were related to. This concept of whānau and who you belong to has changed now to include not only your blood relations, but to those you gather in life, who you feel that you belong to them and they belong to you. So whakawhanaungatanga was about establishing your sense of belonging. So this process, and how I introduced myself before, ngā ngaro te huka te maunga, waihua te awa, kahanguna te iwi, kura heka kawa te hapu, waihua te marae. ki tēnei taha hoki ki ngā maunga o te whenua ko te mana ki raro o te Gordon Tartan me Clan McGregor ki te tau tōku matua no te whenua o Tiamana ia ko Tipene Pickett tōku ingoa. And so what I just said then was the waves of Te Huki is my mountain, Waihua, the fruitful waters, is my river, Kahangunu is my tribe, Kura Hikakawa is my sub-tribe, Waihua is the community and marae I belong to. And also giving acknowledgement to my mother's ancestry from Scotland. I descend from the Highlands of Scotland under the korowai, under the cloak of the Gordon Tartan and Clan McGregor. On my father's side, I come from Germany, a place called Baden-Baden. And so it's an acknowledgement of both sides of my ancestry. And that's how we would introduce ourselves in this process of whakawhanaungatanga. I'm going to tell you where I'm from. And maybe you have someone from these places that you connect to. And through those connections, we can start this process of belonging. And so after this process, there would be, and this varied, sometimes the order of this changed sometimes from different tribes and different sub-tribes. Some people have this process at the beginning, but in the old days, this was done at the end. Because if you can imagine, this process started with distance. And what's happened is you've got closer and closer, closer together to now that you know something about me and I know something about you, that we can now touch noses and share the breath of life. And ngi is also the vibration. That word ngi is also has a genealogy which means the vibration of peace. So not only am we going to acknowledge the first breath into the first Māori woman, Hine Ahuone, and the activation of her life principle through the touching of noses, but also that I will share peace with you. And that's my son there, and that's a traditional hongi. Sometimes they would touch the foreheads too, often, mostly it was just the nose, but sometimes it was the forehead to share what they call the ihi rangaranga. There was a sharing, like a psychic bond, a psychic sharing of knowledge from me to you. And so from this process of being a long way away, we're now in each other's space and feel safe enough that we can touch noses. And then what would happen after this is we would go and share food. And in sharing of food, you've changed the state from unknown to known, from unsafe to safe, from darkness to light, and that from tapu to noa, from a state of restriction to a state of freedom from restriction. And so these are our processes informed by our puuraakau of how to form a relationship that acknowledges the individuality of you, however, that you don't exist in isolation from those that you feel like you belong to. And that in that process of feeling like you belong to and the responsibility that goes with that the establishment of a relationship has begun. And so pre-European, that was our way of our process of engagement. It looks quite similar to today, but instead of starting a long way out from that pā, now it tends to start from that gate. So people will collect at the gate and it starts there. There's still distance, but the ritual hasn't changed, but maybe some of their setting looks a little bit different today. So folks, that's the journey of tapu to noa, of unsafe to safe, unknown to known, constriction to freedom, and it's this process that Māori use whenever we are engaged with people who come to our services seeking help, is our way of engaging with you, as we're going to acknowledge that you're not only a terrestrial being, but you're a celestial being. You descend from the vibrational realms of the universe. You contain the knowledge of the universe within you, and you matter. And I think for me there's something, as I got to know this process, and it was a man by the name of Nephi Skipwith, who is someone I worked with who shared this with me, I started to see the beauty of our process that not only acknowledged the physical, but was also acknowledging the non-physical in them, and that the importance of the non-physical and the celestial realms in the building of relationship with people. So I got to feel very proud and very, very amazed at the knowledge my ancestors had to form have an engagement process that really looked after our own safety, but looked after your safety too. And so I believe there's something of value of the Indigenous ways that we have of building relationship through a process like this, which is very different to what I was taught in the counselling schools, which ignored the spiritual dimensions, which often and certainly didn't encourage me sharing about me and leaving that person with no sense of the shape of the container they're going to place their trust in. So this process allowed me to share about who I was, who I am, so they could get a sense of, okay, I know something about you, you're willing to share something about you. I feel maybe that's easier for me to share something about me. And now these days I generally ask, is there anything you need to know about you, about me, that will make it safe for you to be in this space? So these processes have changed my way of being in my work profoundly, and I feel very honoured to descend from Kahangunu, who was a man who, to give you a sense of identity, when not long after my mother found out where we were from, I found a book called Takitimu, and it had the stories of all my ancestors. And for the first time, I got to see a pattern. And I'd always wanted to be Bruce Lee, I know there's something about the warrior archetype that I always wanted to be, but I never seemed to be that. And yet when I read the stories of Kahangunu, who's my iwi ancestor, and a man called Tahuki, and a number of others who are my ancestors, they were the lovers, not the fighters. And I went, I can claim that. And so I had a map of who I was. And I'm really blessed to have that. There's not many people who can have stories of your ancestors going back 1,000 years and then connect themselves back to the beginning of creation. And I feel incredibly blessed that I can do that, because it gives me a sense of solidity in who I am, and knowing that I am the product of my ancestry. And I see this in my son. He carries kahangunu and that spirit of the lover with him also. So I know that that sense of identity through our stories and through my ancestry, I feel very grateful for. And I think there's like 2 minutes there, and I think I'll leave it there, folks. And I really appreciate it. I'd like to just do a quick song to finish it off. Tira tira ra taku tau, ke hea ra ke hea, ke runga ke raro ke roto I toku moe moea, ke roto I toku moe moea. It talks about what the grandparents are looking for, what's most precious. They look up and they look down, and in the end they see it in their dreams, and what they're searching for is their grandchildren. So I'll leave it here.
That was Tipene Pickett in this Juneau World Affairs Council presentation, produced in collaboration with KTOO. It was recorded October 25th, 2024 at KTOO in Juneau. JWAC presentations are supported by season sponsor Core Alaska Kensington Mine, with additional support by DreamHost.com and individual contributors.